Well, Dr. Reuven, it's an absolute pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with you. And for the next few minutes, I'm going to be talking to Dr. Reuven BarOn, who's one of the world's leading experts on emotional intelligence. But rather than me tell people who you are and what you do, can I turn it over to you, Dr. BarOn?
Okay, I've been involved in this area today we call emotional intelligence. I refer to it as emotional social intelligence, but this particular area I've been involved in for probably going back to the late 70s, early 1980s, and I've been involved in a number of basic areas, primarily the definition of this concept and the way to measure or ways of measuring it, as well as applying it in various settings. I think that you would probably like to know what is the difference between emotional intelligence and emotional social intelligence. Is there a difference between
Yes,
the two I just
thank you.
mentioned? And emotional intelligence is a term that was first voiced probably in 1966 by a psychologist by the name of Paul Lerner, and later it became more prominent in the literature based on an article that Peter Salovey and Jack Muir wrote in 1990 when they first started to define this particular area. Emotional intelligence, I think, is a misnomer. I think that there's been many different terms for this particular concept over the years, starting all the way back to Charles Darwin in 1872 and all the way up to the present. I think it's a misnomer because we actually do not think, reason with emotions. Emotions are translated into feelings, which are second-order emotions, what we think about our emotions and why they occur. And so we actually think with feelings rather than with emotions. So it is a misnomer in itself. And also there has been attempts of defining what has been called social intelligence since 1920 by Edward Thorndike. And if you look at the definitions of social intelligence from 1920, from that period on, they're very similar to the first definitions that we see occurring after 1990 of emotional intelligence. Secondly, it's hard to separate the emotional intelligence from social intelligence. Emotions develop in young children, infants, and they're quite often expression of dissatisfaction. They want to eat, they're wet, they have to have their nappies changed,
Okay.
and they want to be held and cuddled. So there's in the beginning sort of a very egocentric type of expression and use of emotions, but very quickly an infant, a young child learns that there's other people around. There's a mother, sometimes a mother and father, and other siblings as well. So the expression of emotions and the understanding of emotions grows up very early in a social environment. So this is another reason why it's difficult to separate the two. Also, we find, based on neurological studies of emotional and social intelligence, that they appear to be along the same neural circuit in the brain. We're talking about the medial prefrontal lobe and subcortical areas like the hypothalamus and the amygdala. Certain areas, the right side of the brain, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to say along the circuitry where emotional intelligence lies and where social intelligence lies. They seem to be intertwined. So from a developmental point of view and from a neurological point of view, it's hard to separate the two, and I've attempted to call it as one term emotional dash social intelligence. That's the derivation behind the two.
Okay. Now, how would you explain the BarOn model?
The BarOn model of emotional social intelligence suggests that we use emotional and social cues to understand ourselves, understand others, and to interact with people. And it also suggests that it's not just a question of understanding our emotions and emotions of other people for communication, interpersonal relationship. We have to have some sort of a system that controls emotions and to allow us for emotions to work for us and not against us. And so there has to be some degree of self-control or emotional self-control that sort of filters out and holds down emotions that can be disruptive in communication and understanding things. And then another component of the BarOn model has to do not just with understanding emotions, but also to look at to validate our emotions, to check those emotions out with other people. We feel sad, happy, appreciated by other people or not so, and we check those emotions out with it. We ask questions, we look at facial expressions, we read body language, and all this as an attempt to not just understand emotions, to validate emotions. Is that correct, the way we're feeling, or the way other people are expressing emotions? So it has to have a built-in reality testing component. Another aspect of the BarOn model also appears in other models of emotional intelligence, and that is a combination, you might say, of drive, happiness, contentment, optimism, that blends into self-motivation. Self-motivation is composed of all these things together, and some people in the field think that motivation, self-motivation, optimism, or happiness is not part of emotional intelligence, but a byproduct of. That is a possibility, but today I think that the way we use self-motivation is important, and that can help us in the other components of the BarOn model, which is understanding our own. We'll be self-motivated to understand ourselves, and self-motivated to interact with other people, and self-motivated to understand our emotions and other emotions, and to apply them in a way that is constructive. So we have to have this other component of self-motivation. Essentially, that is the BarOn model. It breaks up into a number of subcomponents, and these are interrelated in those particular areas, in the way we understand ourselves and our emotions and feelings, the way we understand other people, the way we adapt to an ever-changing environment, and the way we control emotions as they work for us and not against us. The way I have constructed the BarOn model, that these highly interrelated components in these 5 basic areas are all indicative, to a certain extent, of how one deals with one's world. Some of these components are more important in responding to an ever-changing world and dealing with challenges that arise every day, and the way of getting more into this on a more scientific basis would be to look at a particular behavior. Like, let's say that if you wanted to study leadership, what makes a good leader or a poor leader, based on the BarOn model, the best way of doing this would be to apply the EQI, another one of my tests I developed based on my conceptual model, and have some way of looking at performance as a leader. And then it's a simple process of examining the impact, using statistics, the impact of those 15 models on leadership.